Welcome everyone to the May edition of the OpenZFS leadership meeting. I'm just bringing up the note. I think we have mostly status updates, but there's a lot has happened in the past month. So just wanted to keep everyone on the same page about all the interesting work that's been going on. So first off, UL ODA 8 was released. So congratulations to Brian and everyone else involved in making the release. Brian, do you want to say anything about that?
Just briefly that, yeah, 08 was released last week. So far it's been, I would say, quite successful. We haven't seen, we've seen a lot of downloads of it and a lot of excited people. So I would say so far it's been a very successful release.
Awesome, thanks. Any questions about that? Cool, then let's go on to, next item I had was Illumos encryption status. So ZOL ODA 8 included encryption and encrypted send and receive, so presumably that stuff is all totally working and bug-free. And as far as I know, I haven't seen any bug reports on Illumos, so for Illumos encryption recently. So I wanted to check in with, I think Jerry or Jason or Jorgen or anyone else whose name begins with a J who knows about Illumos encryption to give us an update on that.
Hi, this is Jerry. I have all of Jorgen's work pulled over and built, and I'm running it right now. There's a couple of issues with some ZFS test failures that I'm looking at, and as soon as I can get those resolved, I would be putting it out for the Illumos code review, and then, you know, trying to get that pushed along and integrated. So I think we're pretty close to being there on that.
Cool. And the Illumos code review that you're talking about, is that the RTI, or is there additional review that we need on the code?
Well, what we've been doing is we put it out to the Illumos developers and mostly ask them to look if there's any issues related to the way it was ported to Illumos as opposed to anything about the original work itself.
Gotcha.
And leave that out there for a short period of time for people to have a chance to look at it before we submit the RTI.
Cool, thanks, Jerry. Anything else on Illumos encryption? Cool. The next status item is mine, which is RAIDZ expansion. I have been actually working on implementing RAIDZ expansion again after a long break. So I just want to let folks know that I will have a alpha test out probably this week or next week. That'll be against ZFS on Linux. And it will sort of kind of work. It's still alpha. It's still don't use this on any pools that you care about, because you're going to have to destroy them later because the underscore format is going to change. But it does let you add a device to a RAIDZ group, and then it reflows all the data across it in the background, and then you have more space. So there's a bunch of caveats which will be in the they'll put in the pull request. And it's still very early, but I would love to get help testing, including running manual tests, running tests in your environment with your workload, and potentially help writing more systemic tests that will be part of the test suite. Would also be greatly appreciated. Any questions or comments on that? Cool. Next, I just wanted to highlight a couple of talks that happened at BSDCAN. Alan, sorry to put you on the spot. I didn't ask you about this beforehand, but I was wondering if you could just kind of briefly talk about the talk that you gave about the future of ZFS on FreeBSD, and maybe give an update on the, that work and how it's being received in the FreeBSD community.
Yeah, the main goal of the talk at BSDCAN was to try to assuage fears some people had when they, heard that FreeBSD was going to switch to ZFS on Linux's upstream for ZFS. And I think it was mostly successful in doing that. So to kind of provide the context, I explained, where OpenZFS came from originally, the idea of having the one repo that would be common across all the operating systems and try to keep each of the downstream consumers of ZFS as close together as possible. And then talked a bit about how we strayed away from that and how we're getting back to it and what the advantages would be to FreeBSD to doing this. And I think it went quite well. And then there weren't that many questions, though that might have been the fact that we answered questions for over an hour at lunchtime before the talk.
Cool.
Were there any other specific bits that you had in mind?
No, that sounds good to me. I know one of the things that's caused some contention in the FreeBSD community is just the L word being used and associated with this. The L word being Linux. And I think to a large degree, it seemed like that has been addressed through education. I was really pleasantly surprised to see some of the FreeBSD internal discussions where folks were kind of raising that concern and conflating, Linux kernel development with ZFS on Linux. And I was pleased to see that a bunch of people who are not Alan or I speaking up and kind of clarifying that it's different folks involved, and that the folks working on ZFS on Linux and FreeBSD all have kind of the same goals and same code quality sensibilities, and we're all working towards the same goals. So I was pleased to see that.
Yeah, one of the other parts was just differentiating it from other efforts. Like we currently in FreeBSD, we pull in the DRM graphics drivers from Linux, and we use a Linux kernel compatibility layer to be able to have those drivers run on FreeBSD. And I think when they hear ZFS on Linux, they assume that it would end up using something like that, and that would be just more Linuxy code infesting FreeBSD, but in fact, it all goes through the same Solaris porting layer that we already had, and so it doesn't rely on that same kind of framework that pulling in graphics drivers from Linux does.
Gotcha.
I think once people understood that, it was less fear.
Cool. And I think as we've discussed previously at this meeting, it's super cool, and I think it's like it's super cool that we're creating one repo that will have the ZFS bits for two different operating systems, and that you'll be able to test both of those with one pull request. And I think we've discussed at this meeting previously the idea of perhaps changing the names of some things to reflect that. I think I still stand by the previous discussion that we had, where I think we concluded that we'd like to see it get further along and kind of be more done before we do that, because I think once you start changing the names of things, the point of that is to make a big deal out of it and to get a press release or get it in the news kind of. And I think we would rather see that happen after the work is done rather than while the work is kind of still in progress. So just want to let folks know, at least for me, and I think I mentioned this briefly with Brian, it's still on our radars to consider doing something like that. But we'd probably take action after this is done. After FreeBSD actually switches to using what is now the ZOL repo, and once we have all the tests, actually happening on FreeBSD when you open pull requests there and all that stuff.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think it'd be great to get all that infrastructure in place and make sure everything's working well and testing, and we're happy with the workflow. And yeah, I don't think we need to rush to changing names.
Yeah, and hopefully, I don't know the exact dates, but hopefully before our next meeting, the first pull request for that stuff will be made against the Zol repo.
Great.
So I can't commit to anything because I'm not the one doing the work.
Cool.
But that's the timeline I was given earlier today.
Cool. Any more questions or comments on FreeBSD ZFS features? Cool. Then I also gave a talk at BSDCAN. It was about how snapshots work and scalability problems and solutions on there. This is, I won't kind of rehash the content here, but if that's something you're interested in, or you know other folks, you can point them to the slides are posted, and the video will be up eventually, I guess. It seems like it usually takes a few weeks or months for that to happen.
If possible, I think there's a lot of people here at Datto that would like to see that. And if you notice it, if you remember, would you mind posting it in the OpenZFS channel?
Yeah.
Just so we could all see it.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Cool. Anything else from BSDCAN, Alan, or anyone else who was there?
No, I don't think so. But thanks, Matt, for coming out and giving your presentation.
Yeah. Cool. The next thing I have on the agenda is DRAID meeting recap. Richard, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. So the DRAID or declustered RAID workshop we kicked off, gosh, it seemed like a year ago, but I think it was like 2 weeks ago or so. Thanks to Delphix for hosting it at their San Francisco office. And we had about 11 participants. Thanks, Matt, for creating the link there to the meeting recap. We included live edits into the document that link goes to, so that we'd have a permanent record there. And by all means, if you feel you'd like to make a comment or something upon that, then feel free to create a note or send some email or something like that. We'll be happy to address those. There is, we identified quite a bit of work that needs to occur, and I've started to put at least one of those in the pipeline through the process. And what I'd like to do for the participants is to open issues first, even if the code's already written, and then we'll have issues tied back to the pull requests. Just to kind of keep it a little bit together, because when it finally comes in, it's going to be a rather substantial thing to review. So, so those things that make sense to split out, we'll split out so they can be reviewed and without, taking all day long and get those going. So, as usual, if you have any questions or comments, let us know.
Now, again, I'm available to do reviews pretty much any time. So just send me email or mention it on the OpenZFS developers list.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any more questions on the DRAID meeting? All right. So since the last meeting, we put the code of conduct, last agenda item on here. Excuse me. Since the last meeting, we put the code of conduct into place. Karen, do you want to just give an update on that and what we should expect to see next on it?
Yeah, so I'm sure people saw all the discussion. We got a lot of really good feedback and made some changes based on input. So really appreciate everyone's time and attention on that. It's going to be stable from now until the fall. We're gonna, I don't know if I have a specific date for it. If I do, I'll post it in the meeting minutes. But we'll send out a request for nominees to be on the working group. And at that point in time, we will also, like any new members of the working group, will have a review of the code of conduct overall and then send it out once again for public comment. And I think the idea is we want to try to get that done before the DevSummit, the first week of November. So we've got it all just completely done before that event. And that's about it. And in the meantime, any questions that are coming up, we're kind of trying to keep track of them in a separate doc to make sure that we refer back to those over time. But hopefully people will do that for themselves. If they think of a comment that they want to make sure it gets in there, that they reach out to us during that period. They don't see that change. Questions, comments?
Thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I don't think we've actually announced the Developer Summit in this meeting. So Developer Summit, we have a date. It's going to be November 4th and 5th, which is a little bit later than it has been in the past. That date just kind of worked better for the venue and also for avoiding other giant conferences in San Francisco. So hopefully your hotels will only be expensive and not exorbitantly expensive. I haven't sent out the official announcements and stuff, but we're definitely looking for talks and papers. Feel free to send those to me. We'll send out all the dates on email later, but they're also on if you go to OpenZFS.org. I'm going to tell you the dates once I click on the button.
Yeah, I think we were going to do the announcement like beginning of July, end of June.
Yeah. So I think for registration, we'll officially open July 8th, and then you'll need to send me your presentation proposals by August 19th. And then we'll have the conference in November 4th and 5th. We're also looking for sponsors. We have a little bit different sponsorship offerings this year. So if your company is interested in sponsoring, get in touch with Karen, and she can send you the details.
Yeah, and thanks to Datto and Intel for already signing up to be our sponsors.
Yes, excellent. And thanks in advance to Delphix, who I'm sure we'll be able to convince to sponsor again.
Well, we already are, since we're paying for the coordinator.
True. Cool. Any questions about the DevSummit? Most of you there. And you'll notice that we're at the end of our agenda items. You'll notice I did not say anything about the length of the agenda at the beginning of the meeting today.
Good job.
Because I learned that if you do that, then the meeting takes forever. But I will open it up to additional agenda items if folks have to discuss before we close out.
I have a request.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I mentioned this in one of my reviews, but ZFS is starting to completely change its structure. It's time to update the nice overview, including the layouts of the various blocks. If someone who maintains that could do so.
Is that in the, on the OpenZFS webpage or comments in code?
I forget where I saw it. I'm a visual thinker, so I have the URL somewhere. There's a nice URL that describes how the file system is laid out, what data structures point to what. But with encryption, the increasing logs of the possible change to the dedupe table, all that stuff is starting to get to the point where having that updated is going to make it easier to understand what is going on. So
are you talking?
To be done now, but if people who are able to draw such a thing and maintain it can keep it in mind, it would be helpful going forward, I think.
Are you talking about, there's a PDF article called ZFS on disk specification, I believe, that had a bunch of it had a bunch of diagrams and kind of told what a bunch of stuff
That is
means
quite
and
likely what I'm
translation?
thinking of, yeah.
Okay, that was, I remember that because that's actually the first thing that I read when I started developing on ZFS. And at the top of
It's
that
useful.
paper, at the top of that paper, it says Sun Microsystems. So I'm going to say that's really out of date.
That's why it occurred to me it's time to update it if possible.
Yeah. So I think the challenge there is that like I don't know that we have the source to that document. It's like there's just a PDF, and I don't know what the license is associated with that. If we wanted to copy and paste it somewhere else and then update it, but I do agree that it would be great to have an updated on-disk format guide for the because I think that's it's definitely well over 10 years old, and I agree that we've made a lot of changes to the on-disk format in the meantime.
It looks like the draft version that I see mentions that it's under the Berkeley license.
Oh, sweet.
Okay.
I also, I think this is more just to like kind of put the scope of work into perspective. I think it's more of like an aggregation and a beautification kind of thing, because I think we do have this documentation. It's just spread out in a ton of places. So I know like spot.h lists what an embedded block pointer is and what a normal block pointer is, and I have the encryption design document, which is just like a Google Doc, like it's a Google Slides presentation that I made. There's like just bits and pieces in a ton of different places, and making like real I guess most of the work would be like making like real diagrams and stuff like that, and finding a place to put it so that everybody knows where it is.
Or just aggregation, because it is, as you point out, spread out all over the place, which is why I thought of it, because I just reread, at the time I just reread the encryption changes, and then I was looking at the space map log changes, and there are all these things that say, yeah, this is what this data structure does, how this file uses it, but in order to find it, you have to track it down into whichever file it is, as opposed to having a nice overview that people who are writing their own comments or their own code could then look at and hopefully keep up to date.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It sounds like one way to go would be to like scrape the content out of that PDF and reformat it and update it and copy all the stuff from the code comments back into there. I don't know, maybe we'll put out a call on the email list to see if we can get any volunteers to do that. But that would definitely be useful, especially for folks new to ZFS development.
Yeah, it's not critical. It is just something that I think would be good to start going and ideally maintain going forward. Because the changes we're talking about now are we're no longer doing tweaks. We're doing things like completely changing how certain fields are used in certain circumstances.
Yeah, totally. I think it would be great to have that in a format, that's not just a PDF, that we can actually, whether it's Markdown or whatever, something that we can check in to some repo, and then whenever you make a change on this format, part of the review process is somebody reminds you to go update that file as well.
Yep.
Bonus points if it could be auto-generated. Something to be maintained separately.
Yeah.
So there's a way to auto-generate a description of the structures, or a graphic description of the structures. BSD had that for a very long time for, say, proc.h. And that would be a reasonable place to start, I think. Start with that and then start annotating it, possibly. But
Yeah,
I don't remember the code, the program that was used to do that.
well, I seem to remember Spectralogic took ZFS and Doxygen-fied it years ago. And I think that got part of the way there. I don't know that ever made it back into OpenZFS either.
Yeah, as I recall, that was more about commenting like the functions and what each function did. And I think that Sean's talking more about the data, the on-disk data structures, which I don't recall being swept up in that, Doxygen stuff, but maybe it was.
These are possibly two different things, but they're still both useful. ZFS is extremely complicated, and knowing what a data structure is used for is getting hard.
Yeah. All right, well, I can take the AI to at least put out a call for help on the mailing lists.
Thank you.
You're joining at the end of the meeting. We're wrapping up, amazingly. Any more agenda items, stuff that folks would like to discuss?
There was quite a bit of movement on the disabling the ability to disable the compressed ARC PR, or well, it wasn't a pull request yet, the issue on GitHub. It turns out there is actually a modest performance impact with compressed ARC, mostly having to do with the fact that when you're getting a cache hit from the compressed ARC, you decompress one block at a time. There's no parallelism at all. And so you get bottlenecked down to a single thread, how fast a single thread can decompress, whatever your block size is at a time. And compared to with it off, it can be up to 50% slower.
Wait, at what point does it get serialized?
So when you're doing a read it's not serialized. I mean, it's not
right.
I don't think it's fair to say it's serialized. It's saying if you have if you have one thread reading, then that one thread is the thread doing the decompression of the blocks that it's requesting, as opposed to in the old way, the decompression would happen at the time that it's prefetched. So if you're reading sequentially, then the prefetcher is going to go kick off all those reads in the background, and those background reads includes the decompression. Versus now, the background reads just includes the read from disk, and then when you actually do the demand read, then the decompression happens. So if you have one thread that's doing a bunch of stuff, that one thread is the one doing the decompression. If you have a whole bunch of threads reading a whole bunch of different stuff, then they all get to decompress, concurrently. So it's not that it's serialized. It's just that if you're making serial requests, we aren't magically making them parallelized as we did in the past. Is that fair, Alan?
Yes, that's a much better description than what I was trying to say.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, and so maybe we could have some kind of read-ahead thread decompressing stuff into the debuff cache. But at the same time, we don't want to burn a lot of CPU doing that, so I don't know how to find the right balance, but it seems like that won't be as easy a win as we thought.
Yeah, I think that is not, there's lots of use cases that won't be affected by that, but single-threaded sequential read is certainly an important use case as well. So I could understand wanting to do something about that.
Right, so I guess there's actually two different issues. The first one is we thought we could just get rid of the ability to disable compressed ARC because it wasn't that useful, but maybe it is. And then separately, we should probably have a new issue to look at. What can we do to make the performance of single-threaded reads from compressed ARC better?
And do you think that if we address this single-threaded read issue, then we'll be able to remove the support for non-compressed ARC?
We could consider it. I don't know how much value it has. The original impetus for it was dealing with the interactions with the L2 ARC, and I have to look at it a little more closely, but some of the changes Tom made when he did the encryption stuff, where there's now the L2ARC untransform function and so on, might have obviated the need for some of it.
Okay.
So I have to go look at that again and see. So I think there's less push to get rid of it now, because I think I found another way around the problem that originally caused me to propose the idea. And there's been enough, I guess, legitimate pushback that maybe we don't want to do that anymore.
Okay. Cool. Paul, thanks for the links to that license for the on this format documentation that were posted in the comments. Any other topics for discussion? Going once.
I wouldn't mind highlighting real quick that now that ZOL 0.8 is out the door, it would be good if I could get some eyes on the redacted send receive pull requests. I've been rebasing that on top of master for a long time now, and I would like to get that off my plate.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put it on my review list. I will get you some reviews.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And I think that code, aside from you, Brian, it does have several outside reviews from outside Delphix as well. So hopefully we're good on the review front, and we'd love to have your input and eventual approval.
Great. Is the current version up to date? It sounds like you've been keeping it up to date.
Yeah, it should be up to date.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I look forward to getting in all the stuff that we have pending for post 0.8. Be really nice.
Me too. There's actually a ton of good work queued up. It's very exciting.
Yeah, totally.
All
right. Other topics? Going once? Going twice? Enjoy your 20 minutes back, and we'll see you all in June. What is the next meeting? June
20-something, 20.
18th? I have 18th on my calendar, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if that should be an 11 a.m. one.
Yeah, well, that's only 3 weeks from now. Do we want to push it back so that it's continues to be 4 weeks? Because I think we pushed this meeting back. Do we want to?
Only pushing all of them going forward, but.
Okay.
I mean, I don't care.
Yeah. If folks don't care, then why don't we push it to the 25th so that it's 4 weeks from now, and keep the 4 week. Yeah. Is that?
That sounds fine.
Sounds good.
Is it time to do it at 11 instead of 1?
I thought that the last one was at 11, but maybe
Oh, I'll check.
The last one was at 11, April 23rd, 11 o'clock.
All right, then we're good.
So I think we're doing two at this time, and then one at 11.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. The next meeting will be on June 25th at the same time as this one, 1 o'clock Pacific. Awesome. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.